Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony, and today I'll be discussing a topic that is very close to my heart: global warming. As we know, global warming is an epidemic that is causing many bad effects around the world, such as polar ice caps melting, the increased heat, and also many weather changes that most of us aren't a fan of, such as very hot summers or very cold winters, and even some unexplainable things like snow in the summer, which is pretty crazy. So today we'll be discussing global warming, and I actually have chosen 5 countries that I feel would be best for this. The 5 countries that I chose was the United States, Saudi Arabia, China, Canada, and the United Arab Emirates. So these 5 countries, the reason I chose them was because the United States and Saudi Arabia are pretty good producers of oil. So I decided to use those two. As for China, I felt that it was definitely a good country because it is a powerhouse both in the trading industry and in the usage of coal, which is another fossil fuel that we find used every day. Another key thing that I really want to mention is that whenever you guys see a car or you see an airplane in the sky, just know that those are all contributions to the global warming epidemic. And every time you buy an iPhone or any of those other things, those are also contributions because coal had to be used in order to power the factories that China uses in order to make our everyday devices or products. So enough about that. Let's talk about the data that I compiled. So the data that I compiled firstly was for the crude oil. The crude oil is actually pretty interesting. I was able to find the production and consumption of oil between the years of 2010 until 2014 for all 5 countries. So I decided to make a pivot table for each type. So there was a pivot table for the production of oil and another pivot table for the consumption of oil. So let's now look at that. I actually have it on my dashboard, all of the pivot charts that I created for this information. So let's get started. The 2 countries that I'll focus on is the United States and China. We can also focus on Saudi Arabia, but actually they don't really have much of a carbon footprint than China and the United States. So let's first look at the oil produced. In China, there's only a 14% production of oil, while in the United States, there is a 31% production of oil. But now if we look over the consumption of oil, we can see that the consumption of oil for the United States is much higher. It's up 57%, while the consumption of oil for China is approximately 26%. Now, you're probably thinking, well, the United States seems to have consumed more crude oil, therefore they should have a higher carbon footprint. But if we look closely at the CO2 emissions by country, the gray area, which is China, actually has a much higher carbon footprint. It's 55% of the 5 countries. And the United States only has a 37% carbon footprint. As you can see, crude oil is a factor in the CO2 emissions because the United States actually does emit 37%, but it's not really a major one that based on what we see for China and Saudi Arabia and all the other countries that I mentioned. So that got me thinking, maybe there's another factor that is contributing to the CO2 emissions from these countries. So I did more digging, and I actually found the CO2 emissions per person, which is, I feel it's a little relevant, but not too much since China has such a big population. It says that per person, the short tons that people actually emit for the carbon footprint is 6.2. But as I said, it won't really help you make a final decision. So I actually started researching the coal production and consumption of each country. So, which I will now show you guys. The CO2, this is considered the CO2 emissions by country, the pivot table, and this is the CO2 emissions per person, as I showed you before. But now we can actually look at the production and consumption of coal. So this is considered the production of coal. As you can see, Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates don't really have coal mines, so they don't produce any coal. However, if you look at China's and the United States usage, or even Canada, you can see that they produce a lot of coal. However, if you specifically look at the figures for 2010, you see that just in 2010, China produced 3.5 million of 3.5 million short tons of coal. And here we can see that the consumption is 3.6 million of coal. And this is all considered a format called short tons. So now let's look back at the dashboard. If we look at the dashboard, we see that... I'm sorry, just give me 1 second. I will get now back to the dashboard. So if we look at the dashboard, we notice that the production and consumption of coal is pretty relevant in our analysis of the CO2 emissions, because it actually shows us the real answer. Alright, so now let us look at the short tons of coal. Here it is. So this is the short ton of coal produced. As you can see, China has the most production, 75% of it, among these 5 countries, and their consumption is 77%. And this is all for 2000. I actually used the 2010 figures in order to simplify it. So as you can see, China produces a lot of coal, but they also consume a lot of coal. And this is actually causing a lot of crazy things to happen in China. There is a lot of black smoke clouds that are coming around the certain areas of China. And most of these smoke clouds aren't really healthy, so people have to wear masks. And there are also a lot of things called oxygen bars, which is pretty crazy. We think that we have a tough time breathing. Chinese have the worst. I'm so sad. They actually have the worst time when they're at their countries and they're in the big cities, because most of these cities have factories. So definitely keep that in mind whenever you go visit China, because there is a lot of places that you may not be able to breathe very easily. Now, based on my analysis, I saw that the coal seems to be the contributing factor that made the CO2 emissions in China so high. So if China continues the way it is, it will increase the amount of CO2 emissions that it has in the country, and it can put the lives of their Chinese citizens in danger. Therefore, it's definitely a good idea to try to cut down on coal and use more fuel efficient sources. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope you guys learned something from this, because I really enjoy talking about it. Thank you for everything, and have a great day.